The air in the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art tasted of champagne and quiet judgment. For Helen John, it was the taste of her own invisibility. 5 years ago, her name on the guest list would have caused a stir. Tonight, she was a ghost haunting the edges of a life that was once hers, a life of glittering chandeliers and whispered secrets. They looked through her, the titans of industry and the doyens of society, their eyes sliding past her simple navy gown to land on someone more important, more relevant. But in the center of the room, a magnetic pole of power and charisma, stood the one man who couldn't pretend she didn't exist, even as he tried. James Anderson, her ex-husband. And on his arm was the perfectly polished woman he was meant to marry all along. Helen was just a relic, a forgotten story. Or so they all thought. But some stories don't end. They just wait for the most public stage imaginable to begin their second act. The theme of the annual Metropolitan Legacy Gala was Gilded Dreams, a concept so steeped in irony, Helen felt a bitter laugh bubble in her chest. Her dreams had once been gilded, plated in the finest 24-karat gold that the Anderson fortune could buy. Now they were stripped down to the raw, resilient bronze of her own making. She clutched her small borrowed clutch, its silver clasp cold against her clammy fingers. Sophie Chen, the fiery art gallery owner, who had championed Helen's sculptures and secured her this ticket, gave her a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. "Just breathe," Sophie whispered, her voice a sharp contrast to the dull roar of the crowd. "Your piece is in the charity auction. You belong here more than half these vultures who haven't had an original thought since their trust funds matured." Helen offered a weak smile. "It's not about belonging, Soph. It's about surviving the memories." Everywhere she looked, ghosts of her past life swirled. The scent of lilies and gardenias, the same flowers James had filled their penthouse with every week. The low hum of the string quartet playing a Vivaldi piece they had danced to at their wedding. The clinking of crystal glasses, a sound she now associated with tense family dinners presided over by James's formidable mother, Genevieve Anderson. She saw Penelope Astor, a woman whose face seemed permanently frozen in a state of smug condescension, lean in to whisper to her companion, her eyes flicking towards Helen. The words were lost in the din, but the meaning was clear. That's her. The first wife. The one who didn't fit. Helen's spine stiffened. She had spent the last 5 years painstakingly rebuilding her identity. She wasn't Helen Anderson, the failed wife. She was Helen John, sculptor. Her hands, once soft and manicured for society events, were now calloused and stained with clay and metal dust. She had poured every ounce of her pain, her resilience, her hope into her work. The small bronze sculpture up for auction tonight, titled Shattered Echo, was a testament to that journey. It depicted a heart fractured, but held together by delicate intertwining tendrils. It was everything she couldn't say in words. Then she saw him. It was impossible not to. James Anderson commanded a room the way a conductor commanded an orchestra. At 6'3", with dark hair that fell with a practiced casualness over his brow and eyes the color of a stormy sea, he was the undisputed king of this gilded cage. He was laughing, a deep rumbling sound that Helen still felt in her bones, at something a senator was saying. And on his arm, a vision in emerald silk, was Bianca Dubois. Bianca was the daughter of a French banking magnate, a woman bred for this world. Her pedigree was impeccable. Her smile polished her every gesture, a study in effortless grace. She was the woman Genevieve had always wanted for her son. The papers had been speculating for months that an engagement was imminent. Seeing them together wasn't a shock, but it was a physical blow, knocking the air from Helen's lungs. Bianca's head was tilted towards James, a look of pure adoration on her face. A look Helen once owned. Their eyes met across the crowded room, just for a second. James's smile faltered, the light in his eyes dimming as he registered her presence. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Surprise, pain, maybe even regret, before a mask of cool indifference slammed down. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture one might give a passing acquaintance, and turned back to his conversation. He had dismissed her. In one cold, calculated gesture, he had relegated 5 years of marriage, of shared secrets and late-night laughter, of love and devastating heartbreak to a footnote. The room suddenly felt suffocating. The champagne in her stomach turned to acid. "I need some air," Helen muttered to Sophie, her voice tight. She turned to escape to the terrace, to flee the weight of 1,000 judging eyes and one pair that had once looked at her like she was the entire universe. But as she moved, a figure blocked her path. Tall, elegant, and radiating an aura of glacial authority. Genevieve Anderson. Her silver hair was coiffed into a perfect chignon, and her diamond necklace glittered like shards of ice against her throat. "Helen," she said, her voice smooth but laced with venom. "I must admit, I'm surprised to see you here. I thought you'd be more comfortable in humbler settings." The insult was as sharp and clean as a surgeon's scalpel. Helen lifted her chin, refusing to let the woman see her crumble. "Hello, Genevieve. It's a charity event. My work is being auctioned to support emerging artists." She allowed a small pointed smile. "Something I've had to become myself." Genevieve's perfectly sculpted lips thinned. "Ah, yes. Your little hobby. How quaint. Do try to enjoy the evening. From a distance." With that, the matriarch swept past a queen dismissing a peasant. The message was clear. "You are not welcome here. You are a stain on our perfect family portrait." Helen stood frozen for a moment, the coldness of the encounter seeping into her bones. This was a mistake. Coming here was a terrible mistake. She had thought she was strong enough, that 5 years had built a sufficient wall around her heart. But all it took was one look from him, one word from her, and the wall crumbled into dust. The terrace offered a temporary reprieve. The cool September air was a welcome balm against her flushed skin. Below, the lights of Central Park twinkled like a fallen constellation. For a few precious moments, Helen allowed herself to just breathe, focusing on the distant sound of sirens instead of the crushing weight of the party inside. She had survived worse than this. The brutal divorce proceedings, the slanderous whispers in the gossip columns orchestrated by Genevieve, the loneliness of starting over with nothing but a broken heart and a small savings account. She had survived. "I thought I might find you out here." The voice, that deep, familiar voice, sent a tremor through her entire body. Helen didn't have to turn around. The air itself seemed to shift, charged with his presence. She closed her eyes, gathering her strength before facing him. "You always did know where to find me when I needed to escape," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. She turned slowly. James Anderson stood a few feet away, his hands tucked into the pockets of his impeccably tailored tuxedo. The indifferent mask was gone, replaced by a look of profound weariness and something else. Something that looked dangerously like pain. He wasn't with Bianca. They were alone. "Helen, He started, then stopped as if the words wouldn't form. "I didn't know you would be here." "And if you had, would you have barred me at the door?" The bitterness in her tone surprised even herself. "No, of course not," he said quickly. "You have every right. I saw your sculpture in the auction catalog. It's beautiful. It feels like you." The compliment felt like a breadcrumb tossed to a starving woman. She wouldn't take it. "It's called Shattered Echo. I'm sure you can appreciate the sentiment." A muscle tightened in his jaw. Was it all shattered, Helen? Everything. This was the conversation they never had. The divorce had been a cold, clinical affair handled by lawyers who were paid to be vicious. They hadn't spoken a single word directly to each other in 5 years. "You're the one who held the hammer, James," she shot back, her voice low and fierce. "Don't pretend you don't remember." The memory was seared into her mind. James, his face pale and rigid, standing in their sprawling living room overlooking the city. In his hand was a folder filled with what he called proof. Grainy photographs of her having coffee with an old friend from art school, a man named Peter. Bank statements doctored to show large unexplained deposits into her account. A typed letter, her signature expertly forged, discussing her plans to leave him once she'd secured a generous settlement. It wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage, Helen, he had said, his voice void of all its usual warmth, hollowed out by pain. It was a betrayal of me. My mother warned me. She said you were just playing a part. I defended you. I looked like a fool. James, it's a lie, she had screamed, tears streaming down her face. Look at me. It's not true. Your mother hates me. She set this up. Stop. He had commanded the word like a slap. Just stop. The lawyers will handle the rest. He had walked out not just of the room but of their life. He never looked back. He had believed the lies over the woman he had vowed to love for eternity. Now standing on the terrace, the same chasm of misunderstanding yawned between them. I remember everything, he said softly, his stormy eyes searching hers. I've replayed that day in my mind 1,000 times. 1,000,000. And you still believe it, don't you? She asked, her heart aching with the old familiar pain. You still think I was a gold digger who cheated on you? He didn't answer immediately. He looked away towards the city lights that represented his kingdom. I believed what I was shown. The evidence was compelling. The evidence was a fabrication, and you were a coward. She said the words spilling out before she could stop them. You were too afraid to stand up to your mother, too afraid to believe in me. It was easier to believe I was a monster than to admit your own family was. He flinched as if she had physically struck him. Before he could respond, the terrace door slid open. Bianca Dubois glided out, her emerald dress shimmering in the moonlight. Her smile was bright, but it didn't reach her eyes. Darling, there you are, she said, her voice a silken purr. She slid her arm through James's, her perfectly manicured hand resting possessively on his forearm. Her gaze flickered to Helen, a flash of triumphant dismissal in her eyes. Mr. Vanderbilt was just asking for you. We shouldn't keep him waiting. She was marking her territory. James looked torn, his eyes still locked on Helen's. The unspoken words hung heavy in the air between them, but the moment was broken. He allowed Bianca to pull him away back towards the light and the noise of the gala. It was seeing you, Helen, he said over his shoulder, the words sounding hollow and inadequate. Helen watched them go, a perfectly matched set. The billionaire and his flawless future bride. She was left alone in the cool darkness, the ghost on the terrace with nothing but the echoes of a love that had been shattered by a lie. The encounter had confirmed it. Nothing had changed. To him she was still the villain of his story. Returning to the ballroom was like plunging back into icy water. The air crackled with energy as the live charity auction began. Helen found Sophie, who shot her a worried look. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I did, Helen replied grimly. The whole Anderson clan. They took their seats at a table near the back, a small island of anonymity in a sea of glittering power brokers. Helen tried to focus on the proceedings on the auctioneer's rapid-fire patter as priceless jewels, exotic vacations, and celebrity experiences were sold for staggering sums. But her mind was a whirlwind, replaying the confrontation on the terrace. I remember everything. His words were a torment. Finally, her moment came. And now, lot number 32, the auctioneer announced, his voice booming. We have a stunning piece by a truly brilliant emerging local artist, Helen John. This is a bronze sculpture titled Shattered Echo. A polite, lukewarm applause rippled through the room. An image of her sculpture filled the large screens on either side of the stage. Seeing it there so personal and vulnerable displayed for this jaded crowd made Helen's stomach clench. It felt like they were auctioning off a piece of her soul. A truly moving piece capturing the resilience of the human spirit, the auctioneer continued. The artist has pledged 100% of the proceeds to our foundation's Emerging Artists Grant. A noble gesture. Let's start the bidding at a very reasonable $5,000. Do I hear 5,000? Silence. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Helen's face burned with humiliation. $5,000 was a pittance in this room, the cost of the champagne on a single table. It was a slap in the face. She saw Penelope Astor smirk from across the room. "Come now, ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer cajoled. "This is for a wonderful cause. 5,000. Finally a hand went up from a kindly-looking older woman in the corner. 5,000, she called out. Helen let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. 6,000, called another voice. 7,500. The bidding crawled upward in small, reluctant increments. It was stalling around $12,000, a respectable sum for a new artist. Sophie whispered encouragingly, but in this context it was a failure. It was a public declaration of her irrelevance. From the main Anderson table near the front, Helen could hear Bianca's light, dismissive laugh. She leaned close to James and said something, her words just loud enough to carry. "It's a bit depressing, isn't it? Very amateur." Helen felt the blood drain from her face. That single cruel comment was the final nail in the coffin of her composure. She wanted to disappear. Then a new voice cut through the air, calm, clear, and resonant with absolute authority. $100,000. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom, heads craned searching for the source of the audacious bid. Helen's heart stopped. She knew that voice. The auctioneer, stunned, fumbled with his gavel. I have $100,000 from Mr. James Anderson." Every eye in the room swiveled, first to James, who sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Then, like a wave, they turned to Helen. The whispers started instantly, a venomous buzz. Is he pitying her? Is this some kind of power play? Bianca looked utterly blindsided, her perfect smile frozen on her face. Genevieve's expression was thunderous. 100,000 going once, the auctioneer stammered, recovering his rhythm. Going twice. 110,000, came a sharp voice. It was another tycoon, a rival of James's, named Gregory Shaw, who likely saw this as a chance to publicly challenge him. Before Shaw had even finished speaking, James's voice rang out again, louder this time, leaving no room for doubt. $500,000. The room fell into absolute stunned silence. You could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpet. $500,000 for a sculpture by an unknown artist. It wasn't a bid, it was a statement. It was a bomb detonated in the center of the gala. Gregory Shaw slowly lowered his bidding paddle, shaking his head with a disbelieving laugh. Bianca was staring at James, her mouth slightly agape, a mixture of confusion and fury in her eyes. $500,000? The auctioneer said, his voice trembling with excitement. Going once. Going twice. Sold to Mr. James Anderson for $500,000. The room erupted in a chaotic mix of applause and frantic murmuring. Reporters were already scribbling in their notepads, their faces alight with the scent of a scandal. Helen felt dizzy, the room tilting on its axis. Sophie grabbed her hand, her eyes wide with shock. What is he doing? What was he doing? It was a public spectacle. He had humiliated her by ignoring her, and now he was humiliating her with this extravagant act of charity. Or was it power? A way of showing everyone that he still owned a piece of her, that he could buy her past with a flick of his wrist. The auctioneer, beaming, addressed James. Mr. Anderson, a truly incredible act of generosity. Would you care to say a few words? Perhaps tell us where this magnificent piece will be displayed. James rose slowly from his seat. He adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, a small, deliberate movement that commanded the attention of every single person in the room. He walked towards the stage, not with a swagger, but with a grave, determined purpose. The room held its breath. He took the microphone. His stormy eyes scanned the crowd, passing over the shocked faces of his mother and Bianca until they found hers. He locked his gaze with Helen's, and for the first time all night, she saw past the billionaire, past the ex-husband, and saw the man she had once loved. His eyes were filled with a desperate, raw emotion she couldn't name. The entire world seemed to fade away, until it was just the two of them connected by an invisible thread of shared history across a silent watching room. "Thank you." James began, his voice amplified by the microphone, yet feeling as intimate as a whisper directed only at her. "Thank you all. The work this foundation does for the arts is vital. It supports voices that need to be heard, talent that deserves to be seen." He paused, his gaze unwavering from Helen's. The room was so quiet, the collective anticipation was a physical presence. They expected him to talk about the Anderson Foundation, to announce a new wing at a museum. They expected a standard, polished speech from a billionaire philanthropist. "I didn't buy this piece tonight as a donation," he continued, his voice dropping slightly, gaining a new intensity. "I didn't buy it as an investment. I bought it because I know the artist. I know the soul and the strength that was poured into every line and curve of that bronze. I know the story it tells. A story of being shattered and finding the courage to put the pieces back together stronger than before." Helen's breath hitched in her throat. He understood. He saw everything she had tried to express. At the front table, Bianca's face was a mask of cold fury. She looked betrayed. Genevieve looked apoplectic, her knuckles white as she gripped the stem of her champagne flute. This was not part of their plan. He was going off script, and he was doing it on the most public stage imaginable. The auctioneer asked where the piece will be displayed. James said, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "It won't be in a gallery or a museum. It will be displayed in our home, a place it should never have left." A confused murmur rippled through the audience. "Our home." James took a deep breath, steeling himself. This was the precipice. He was about to leap. "There seems to be a great deal of speculation and misunderstanding here tonight and over the past 5 years. So allow me to be perfectly clear." He held Helen's gaze, and in his eyes she saw a plea, an apology, and a declaration all at once. "I bought this sculpture, this beautiful, resilient piece of art," he said, his voice ringing with conviction, each word a hammer blow against the silence. "I bought it for the woman I love, the only woman I have ever loved." The room was electric. Bianca looked as if she had been turned to stone. "I bought it for my wife." He let the words hang in the air for a dramatic, heart-stopping beat. Then he delivered the final world-altering blow. "I bought it for my wife, Helen Anderson." Pandemonium. The word wife detonated in the room, sending shockwaves of disbelief and chaos in every direction. Flashes from cameras erupted like strobing lightning. Reporters were shouting questions, surging towards the stage. The elegant, controlled atmosphere of the gala shattered into 1,000 pieces. Wife. But they're divorced. Did he say Helen Anderson? What about Bianca? Is the engagement off? This is the biggest scandal of the year. Helen felt the floor drop out from under her. She was numb, deaf to the roar around her. The only thing she could process was James's face. His eyes still locked on hers, filled with a desperate hope. Helen Anderson. He had used her married name, a name she hadn't used in 5 long years. Bianca Dubois was on her feet, her face a grotesque mixture of humiliation and rage. She stared at James, her mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. Then, with a strangled cry, she turned and fled the ballroom, a wake of shocked socialites parting before her. Genevieve Anderson rose with a terrifying, regal fury. Her eyes, cold as ice chips, were fixed on her son. She looked at him with an expression of pure murderous rage. Then her gaze shifted to Helen, and the look was so filled with hatred it felt like a physical blow. She too turned and swept from the room, her exit as dramatic and chilling as a queen abandoning her collapsing kingdom. James remained on the stage, a solitary figure amidst the chaos he had unleashed. He lowered the microphone, his shoulders slumping slightly as if the effort of that public confession had drained him of all strength. Sophie was shaking Helen's arm, her voice barely audible over the din. "Helen, Helen, what is happening? What did he mean?" But Helen couldn't answer. Her mind was a blank slate wiped clean by 2 impossible words. My wife. It was a lie. A spectacular public life-destroying lie. They had signed the papers. They were divorced. Weren't they? The foundation of her reality, the painful truth she had built her new life upon, had just been obliterated in front of the entire New York elite. She was drowning, and the only person in the world who seemed to have a life raft was the very man who had pushed her overboard 5 years ago. Before the reporters could swarm her, a wall of broad-shouldered men in dark suits materialized around their table. They moved with quiet, professional efficiency. The man in the lead, whom Helen vaguely recognized as David Chen, the head of James's personal security, leaned in close. "Ms. John," he said, his voice calm but firm amidst the chaos. "Mr. Anderson has requested you accompany me. We have a private room secured." Helen was too stunned to argue. Sophie, ever the protector, stood up. "She's not going anywhere without me." David Chen nodded. "Of course. This way, please." He was Sophie's brother. The realization hit Helen through the fog of her shock. David had worked for James for a decade, a small, strange connection in a world that had just been turned upside down. They were escorted through a service corridor, the sounds of the frantic ballroom fading behind them. They entered a quiet, tastefully decorated library, the kind the museum reserved for its most important patrons. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing them in silence. James was already there, standing by the fireplace, his back to them. He had shed his tuxedo jacket and was staring into the empty hearth. He looked exhausted, the adrenaline of his public performance having worn off, leaving behind a man carrying the weight of the world. He turned as they entered. His eyes found Helen's immediately. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice raspy. Helen finally found her voice, and it was filled with a fury that surprised her. "What have you done?" She whispered the words, trembling with shock and anger. "What in God's name have you done, James?" He took a step toward her, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Helen, please. Let me explain." "Explain?" Her voice rose, cracking. "You get up on a stage and tell the entire world a lie. You call me your wife. We are divorced. I signed the papers. I sat in a cold, sterile office and signed away my name, my life, my heart. How dare you?" Tears of rage and confusion streamed down her face. Sophie put a protective arm around her. "James," David Chen said quietly from the corner of the room, "the car is ready. We should go before they figure out where we are." "Just give me a minute, David," James said, never taking his eyes off Helen. He waited until his security chief had stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Sophie remained a silent guardian at Helen's side. "You're right," James said softly. "You did sign the papers. I watched you do it. It was the worst day of my life. Then what was that? A publicity stunt, a way to destroy me all over again?" "No," he said, his voice raw. "It was the truth. Helen, the divorce was never finalized." Helen stared at him, her mind refusing to process the words. "What? That's impossible. I got the final decree in the mail. My lawyer?" "Your lawyer received a document, yes," James said, his expression pained. "A document my legal team later flagged for a procedural error. An error I instructed them not to correct." It took a moment for the meaning to sink in. When it did, Helen felt a new wave of cold fury wash over her. You sabotaged it. You let me believe for 5 years that I was a divorced woman, that I was free. You let me rebuild my entire life on a foundation of lies. I couldn't let you go," he confessed, his voice breaking. "It was the only piece of you I had left. I know it was wrong. It was selfish and cowardly. I was a fool for believing the lies about you in the first place, and I was a bigger fool for how I handled it afterwards. I should have fought for you, not against you, but I couldn't bring myself to sever that last final tie. In the eyes of the law, Helen, you are and have always been my wife." The revelation was staggering. It recontextualized everything. The past 5 years of her struggle, her hard-won independence, it had all been lived under the shadow of a legal status she knew nothing about. She wasn't a ghost at the feast. She was the lady of the manor, locked out of her own home without her knowledge. She sank into a leather armchair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Sophie knelt beside her, rubbing her back. "Why, James?" Helen asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why tell me now? Why like this?" "Because I'm done hiding," he said, his eyes burning with an intensity she hadn't seen since the early days of their love. "I'm done letting my mother's lies and my own pride dictate my life. I have spent the last 5 years in a gilded hell of my own making, and tonight when I saw you, when I saw how they looked at you, how they dismissed you, and when Bianca—" He shook his head, disgust twisting his features. "When she insulted your art, insulted you, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to reclaim the truth. Our truth." He crossed the room and knelt in front of her, his expensive trousers creasing on the floor. He looked from Helen to Sophie, then back. "I have proof, Helen," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Proof that everything I accused you of was a lie. A carefully constructed, vicious lie designed to tear us apart. And I want to show you." James's penthouse, the very place she had been cast out of 5 years ago, was unchanged. The same sweeping views of the city, the same minimalist furniture, the same scent of lilies and gardenias. It was a mausoleum of their marriage, perfectly preserved. Helen walked through it like a phantom, every object screaming a memory. David Chen met them at the door, a sleek tablet in his hand. Sophie stayed close to Helen, a silent, unmovable support system. "It took me years to piece it all together," James began, his voice heavy with shame. "After the divorce, nothing felt right. The victory my mother claimed felt hollow, rotten. I started digging, quietly at first. I hired the best private investigators in the world, people who had no connection to my family or our company." He gestured to David, who tapped the screen of the tablet. An image appeared, a bank statement. It was the one James had brandished at her all those years ago, showing a $50,000 deposit into her personal account. "This was the cornerstone of her case against you," James said. "An anonymous deposit which she claimed was a payoff from a competitor for inside information." David swiped the screen. A new document appeared, a complex wire transfer record. "We traced it," David explained, his voice professional and detached. "It was a labyrinth. It moved through 3 offshore shell corporations, but we finally found the origin point, a private account in Zurich belonging to Genevieve Anderson." Helen stared at the screen, black and white proof of the lie that had destroyed her life. "She paid you in a way," James said bitterly. "She deposited money into your account to frame you for taking money." Next, David brought up the photographs, the grainy shots of her with Peter, her artist friend. They were pictures of 2 friends having coffee, laughing. But he also brought up the investigators' original uncropped photos. They showed the wider context. They were in a crowded cafe surrounded by people. More importantly, the timestamps on the original digital files were different from the ones James had been shown. "The photos were real," James explained, "but the context was manufactured. My mother's operative cropped them, blew them up to look grainy and secretive. They presented them as evidence of a clandestine affair." The final piece was the most damning. The letter, the one with her forged signature detailing her fictitious plot to divorce him for his money. "We hired 3 different forensic handwriting experts," David said. "All 3 concluded the signature was a near-perfect but ultimately digital forgery. But the real break came when we located the man my mother hired to write it." On the screen appeared a video. A man in his late 60s, his face etched with regret, sat in what looked like a law office. "My name is Julian Croft," the man said, his voice raspy. "I was a specialist in document creation for Genevieve Anderson for nearly 20 years. She paid me handsomely to create a letter in Helen John's voice, using samples of her handwriting she provided. She told me it was a necessary evil to save her son from a terrible mistake. I have lived with the guilt ever since." The video was a full confession detailing every sordid step of the deception. It was irrefutable. Helen felt a strange sense of vindication hollowed out by the sheer depth of the betrayal. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a cold, calculated plot to annihilate her character and her marriage. "I confronted her," James said, his voice thick with emotion. 2 years ago, I laid all of this out in front of her. "What did she say?" Helen whispered. "She admitted it," James replied, his face grim. "She wasn't even sorry. She said you were a common distraction. And she did what was necessary to protect the Anderson legacy. She said I would thank her one day when I was married to a suitable woman like Bianca." "And you? You stayed with her? You let her continue to be a part of your life. You were seen everywhere with Bianca." The accusation in Helen's voice was sharp. "I was a coward," James admitted, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I cut her off financially from my personal fortune, but I couldn't bring myself to expose her publicly. She's still my mother. I thought I could just move on. I tried with Bianca. I really tried. But it was a ghost of a relationship. Every time she smiled at me, I saw you. Every time we went to an event, I searched the crowd for your face. Living without you has been a penance, a 5-year-long sentence." He stepped closer, his stormy eyes pleading. "Tonight I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't stand by her side and pretend. I couldn't let them dismiss you. The truth had to come out, Helen. All of it." As if on cue, James's phone buzzed. It was David. "Sir, your mother is here. She's demanding to see you." James's jaw set like granite. "Let her in." A moment later, the penthouse doors swept open and Genevieve Anderson stormed in. Her composure from the gala was gone, replaced by a cold reptilian fury. Her eyes blazed as she took in the scene, her son, his ex-wife, and the damning evidence still displayed on the tablet. "What is the meaning of this spectacle?" she hissed, her voice shaking with rage. "You have made us the laughingstock of the entire city. Bianca has been humiliated. Our family name—" "Your family name," James interrupted, his voice dangerously quiet. "You forfeited the right to speak of this family's honor when you systematically destroyed my marriage with lies." "I saved you," she shrieked, her mask of civility finally shattering. "She was a nobody, a little artist with big ambitions. She would have ruined you. She was the best thing that ever happened to me," James roared, his voice echoing in the vast apartment. "And you took her away from me. You poisoned me against her with your pathetic paranoid schemes. It's over, Mother. The lies are done." "You will regret this, James," Genevieve warned, her eyes narrowing. "You have chosen this creature over your own blood. You are no longer my son." "Then I am finally free," James said, his voice suddenly calm, resolute. Genevieve shot one last look of pure venom at Helen, then turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The silence she left in her wake was profound. The great matriarch had been dethroned. The war was finally over. But now a new, more complicated one had to be fought. The war for what came next. The heavy oak door of the penthouse clicked shut, sealing them in a silence that was vastly different from the one before. Genevieve's departure had been like a storm, breaking the thunder and lightning of her rage finally receding, leaving behind a strange electrically charged calm. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the ghosts of 5 years of pain and the fragile, terrifying possibility of a future. The battle was over, the lies exposed, the villain vanquished. But as Helen stood in the center of the vast living room, she knew the true war, the one that would be fought within the borders of her own heart, had only just begun. Sophie, in her quiet wisdom, had sensed it instantly. Her parting squeeze was a transfer of strength, a silent message. Be true to yourself no matter what you choose. Now Helen was alone with James, adrift in a sea of memories. She felt a pull, an instinct she hadn't felt in years, and walked towards the floor-to-ceiling windows that wrapped around the room. The city glittered below, a sprawling galaxy of light and life, indifferent to the personal dramas playing out in the towers that pierced its sky. This view had once been her sanctuary, the place she'd come to feel the pulse of the world. Later, it had become her cage, the beautiful backdrop to her heartbreak. Tonight, it was simply a mirror reflecting the two of them, two solitary figures suspended between the past and the future. "So, what now, James?" she asked, her voice soft, barely disturbing the profound quiet. The question wasn't an accusation, it was a genuine, weary inquiry. "You've bought my sculpture in the most outrageously public way imaginable. You've detonated your relationship with your mother. You've announced to the entire world that I'm your wife, which is a truth I haven't lived for half a decade. What did you think was going to happen next?" He came to stand beside her, his own reflection appearing ghost-like next to hers in the dark glass. He didn't look at the city, only at her face, studying her as if trying to memorize the new lines of strength and sorrow etched there. "I didn't think," he confessed, his voice raw with an honesty that stripped him bare. "For the first time in my life, I acted. I saw you and I saw them and I saw the lie I had been living and I couldn't breathe. Everything I did tonight. It wasn't a strategy. It was a last desperate attempt to get back to the only thing that ever felt real in my life. You." He finally paused, taking a breath. "I hoped," he amended, his voice dropping to a whisper, "that you would let me start over." A sad, humorless laugh escaped her lips. It wasn't a sound of mirth, but of pure, unadulterated irony. "Start over, James. You can't just rewind time. You can't erase 5 years of silence. 5 years of me thinking I was nothing to you but a regrettable mistake." She turned from the window to face him fully, needing him to see the truth in her eyes. "I am not the same woman who left this apartment. You have to understand that. The girl you married, she was full of a soft, trusting light. She loved you so fiercely, so completely, that she couldn't imagine a world where that love wasn't enough. When you believed those lies, when you turned your back on her, you didn't just break her heart. You extinguished that light." She saw him flinch, the truth of her words landing like a physical blow. "The woman standing in front of you now," she continued, her voice gaining strength with every word, "had to learn to live in the dark. She found a new kind of light, a harder, tougher kind that she had to build herself spark by painful spark. She learned to pay her own rent in a tiny apartment that shook every time the subway passed. She learned that calluses on her hands from her tools were a badge of honor, not something to be hidden. She built a life, a small but real life, on the rubble of the one your mother destroyed and you allowed to burn. She doesn't need a billionaire to rescue her at a charity auction." "I know," he said, and the profound sincerity in his voice stopped her cold. He took a half-step closer, his presence both a comfort and a threat to the walls she had so carefully built around herself. "My God, Helen, I know that. I've watched you. From a distance. I saw the notice for your first small gallery show. I read the review that called your work viscerally honest. I have never been more proud or more ashamed in my entire life. I'm not trying to rescue you. You're the strongest person I've ever known. You don't need rescuing." He looked down at his own hands, then back up at her, and his eyes were filled with a desperate, gut-wrenching vulnerability she had never seen in him before, not even in their most intimate moments. "I'm asking if you can find it in your heart to rescue me." The plea hung in the air between them, so unexpected and so raw, it stole the breath from her lungs. This powerful man, this titan of industry, who could move markets with a word, was asking her for help. "My life for the past 5 years has been a photograph," he explained, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Perfectly composed, everything in its place, but utterly lifeless. It's been a series of meetings and transactions and hollow obligations. It's been my mother's version of success. But there was no color, no sound, no warmth. There was no you. I'm the one who's been trapped, Helen, in a prison of my own making, haunted by the ghost of what I threw away. You built a real life from rubble. I'm still just living in the ruins." He dared to take another step, closing the distance until only a few feet separated them. He reached out not to touch her, but held his hand in the space between them. It was a question and offering a silent prayer. "Let me start over," he repeated, his voice pleading, "not by erasing the last 5 years, but by honoring them. Let me earn the right to know the woman you've become. Let me court you, Helen, properly. No galas, no expectations. Let me take you to a cheap coffee shop and just talk for hours. Let me visit your studio and learn the story behind every sculpture. Let me earn back a single moment of the trust I so carelessly shattered. His words were a balm on wounds she didn't even know were still bleeding. He wasn't trying to possess her to reclaim her. He was asking for permission to know her. Helen looked from his pleading eyes to his outstretched hand. Every instinct for self-preservation honed over 5 years of solitude screamed at her to turn away, to thank him for the truth and walk out that door back to her safe, quiet life. It was the sensible thing to do. The risk of letting him in again was immense. Her heart, so carefully pieced together, felt fragile as spun glass. But then she looked into his eyes and saw past the billionaire and the ex-husband. She saw the man who on their second date had stood in the rain for an hour with her to watch a street artist finish a mural. The man who had once filled a whole room with sunflowers just to see her smile. The man who was now willing to tear down his entire world just for the chance to say he was sorry. The love she had for that man had never truly died. It had been buried alive, and now it was stirring. Slowly, tentatively, she lifted her own hand. The contrast was stark. Her fingers strong and slightly stained, marked by the clay and metal of her work. His long and elegant, the hand of a man who signed checks that could change the world. It was a meeting of her new reality and their shared past. Her calloused fingertips brushed against his smooth palm. A jolt, a current of memory and warmth and terrifying hope passed between them. It was a connection she thought she would never feel again. She didn't intertwine their fingers. She didn't fall into his arms. But she didn't pull away. She simply let her hand rest against his, a fragile, trembling bridge across a 5-year chasm of pain. "Okay, James," she said, her voice quiet, but steady. A promise and a warning all in one. Page 1. A single tear escaped his eye and traced a path down his cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, or even of joy, but of profound, overwhelming relief. For the first time in years, the storm in his eyes seemed to part, revealing not a shadow, but the first hesitant light of a new dawn. In the quiet of the penthouse high above the sleeping city, the story of Helen and James Anderson was over. The story of Helen John and James Anderson, however, was just about to begin. And so Helen's night of invisibility ended with her becoming the most talked about woman in New York City. But more than that, it was the night she finally got the truth. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but something far more real and powerful, a second chance. Her story reminds us that our worth is never defined by those who ignore us, but by our own resilience and the courage to face the past. It's a testament to the fact that even the most shattered things can be put back together, not as they were, but as something stronger, truer, and more beautiful. What would you have done in Helen's place? Could you have found it in your heart to forgive and start anew? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of betrayal, truth, and second chances resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who loves a powerful comeback story, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas just like this one. Click that notification bell so you never miss a new chapter. Thank you for listening.